Testing, testing.
Good. So, now I have learned I should not be in charge of setting up. I do not know how to do that at all. Hello, everyone. Thanks for waiting through the delay. So, we're all back again. Hello, I'm a little sweaty because I'm trying to figure out how to get that camera all set up really quickly. We're going to be having 3 talks tonight. First one right now is Michael Bennon, going to be talking to you about isomorphic JavaScript. Very exciting. I've talked to more people about this particular talk tonight and in all of the comments before than any other talk in the entire history of the meetup. So I'm really excited to hear Michael talk about isomorphic JavaScript.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Michael Bennon, and today I'll be talking about web application architecture and isomorphic JavaScript. There we go. So the traditional server-side MVC, the majority of the logic occurs on the back end, where the back end would be responsible for rendering the UI, rendering the view, and pages and new routes inside of the application would have a round trip to the server and have a page refresh. As the web evolved, we now have client-side frameworks such as Ember.js, Backbone.js, Angular.js that now handle that for us on the client side. Having a MVC on the server and an MVC-like framework on the client causes a lot of complexity. And as DHH likes to put it, double MVC, where the view is rendered on the server and as well as the client-side framework after the initial page load would then control the application and route it with correct logic to updating the URL, updating the UI. And so the conceptual complexity is very high because essentially you have 2 different languages. You have Ruby, Python, PHP, Java going on the server, and then that's rendering a DOM, and that DOM then is being controlled by a client-side framework like Backbone and Angular. And that essentially is 2 apps, really. You're building like 2 apps. So Yehuda Katz said, anyone who does this is completely insane. And I totally agree. Like having 2 MVCs rendering the DOM from the server and taking control of the client side with a separate app, having an MVC on the server and on the client, that's a lot to maintain. So this tweet said, why do you need Rails to do persistence? Why do you need Ruby on the back end at all? When you have a client-side app that's written in JavaScript, and you can write JavaScript on the server now with Node.js. So what does that bring us? That brings us a client-server MVC, where you have JavaScript on the server, you have JavaScript on the client, and then you have your app. And that's where the term isomorphic JavaScript comes from. It's code that can execute on both the client and server. And what is the definition of isomorphic? Like, why can't we just say dual execution or something that like normal people can understand? Isomorphic is just being identical or similar in form, shape, or structure. Look, yellow ball, yellow ball, yellow ball. So also, Charlie Robbins, other people have coined this term and used them, can execute both on the client and server. Spike Brem, who just had that other slide, the client-server image, JavaScript applications that can run both on the client side and the server side. And Cesar Pino, client-server MVC. So how do we get our JavaScript that executes in the browser to also execute in the server? How can we share this code? How can we share this logic? How can we get this language JavaScript to be unified? Well, they're not the same. The client-side JavaScript executes inside of the browser through a script tag, and Node.js you can execute inside of a terminal. So there are minor differences between executing JavaScript on the client and server. For example, in Node, the global variable is known as global, and then on the client it's known as window. But the most major difference is Node's module system, the require syntax. You may have seen this with frameworks such as require.js, but Node's is a little different. You don't have to update a config. You just require it from wherever that file is relative in the directory tree. So how do we get JavaScript to execute in both environments. There's a tool called Browserify, which lets you write JavaScript in a node syntax, and it will recursively analyze those require statements and build one JavaScript file that you can execute in the client. Now, of course, you're not going to want to run JavaScript on a server that works with the file system. And you're not going to want JavaScript that executes in the client that binds events to the DOM to run on the server. So there's no such thing as like a pure isomorphic app. That's hard to do. So this tool, Browserify, lets you write Node, and you can execute it in the browser, and you can share it between the client and server. So we use it at Condé Nast. That's where I work. I'm a software engineer at Condé Nast. And we have a project that contains 250 plus JavaScript files, and we sent it to production. We used Browserify, and it was a huge win. It's battle tested. You can use Browserify in production right now, and there's 1 million transforms out there for it. And it will make your life so much easier. There's no more updating configuration files in require.js. There's no more concat. There's no updating that config. It just makes your life so much easier. And your code is just, it looks pretty. Like, it's not like client-side JavaScript where you have 1 million script tags in your page. So another major Browserify win is you can use the NPM module system. You can require jQuery. You can require Backbone. You can require handlebars. All your favorite client-side libraries are probably on NPM already. So the main benefit of using Browserify is being able to execute your JavaScript in both environments. That utils that exists on the server, that you use on the server, you can now use it in your client-side app. You can use it in many cases. I'll get to that. I'm going to show some code after I get through some slides. So there are some issues with Browserify. I mean, many client-side developers aren't familiar with Node.js. And in order to use Browserify, your packages, your client, the code that you're Browserifying needs to be CommonJS compatible. But there is a tool called Browserify Shim that can handle those situations. And another part of Browserify is there's no built-in external loading JavaScript feature like with require.js, where you can load a piece of JavaScript at runtime. So there's a tool made by this guy, John K. Paul. I don't know if you guys heard of him, but yeah, he wrote Promethify, and I'm battle testing that as we speak. It's an awesome project. So you're going to want to automate this, and there's already automation tools out there. I use Browserify, there's Gulp Browserify, and there's Watchify, which we use at Condé Nast, which that lets us bundle and stream it directly to the browser instead of ever writing a file. We use Watchify for that, and it's awesome. We refresh, and it happens almost immediately. So there's also this project called Meteor that since we're talking about isomorphic JavaScript, I'm talking a lot about Browserify, but Meteor is another framework that technically is isomorphic, and I can't do this presentation without at least mentioning it. So Meteor is another project that I suggest everyone look at if they're researching isomorphic JavaScript. So I already talked about Meteor. Render, one of the slides that had the client-server image, that's directly from one of the guys at Airbnb. And there's a lot of projects out there that are isomorphic. There's Director, Rear View. But you can pretty much make any JavaScript file isomorphic by using this tool, Browserify. So let's get to the code. How much time do I have? We're good?
You're fine.
Okay. So this is a sample project that I've been playing with. So let's say we want to be able to share a templating language, and we also want to be able to share helpers. But those helpers need to use packages from NPM. So this package Slugify and this package Cozy Slug and Pluralize. So this is directly pulling libraries from NPM. Those are installed through my package JSON, and I'm able to then use them inside of both helpers on the client and server. So because I have the same templating language on the client and server which is handlebars, and also has the same helpers, as you can see, I pass in handlebars. So on the client, I'm actually passing that HBS file because I use that with Browserify, that's a Browserify transform, which lets you require templates. And on the server, I'm using HBS. So I pass in HBS here, I pass in HBS5 on the client-side build, and therefore I can share my templating helpers. I'm also sharing templates throughout the entire project. But note that not every piece of code can be isomorphic. As an example, I do have a helper that only exists on the server, which bootstraps my data. I basically take the context that's passed in, and I put out a data context attribute, and I don't have to make an AJAX request to bootstrap the model. That's only used on the server. So you can easily split up the code and make it sane of which code is used where. Let's see. So another example I'm going to show is sharing models. So, excuse me for a second. So there's many NPM packages that are already isomorphic, and one of them is backbone validations. Inside of my client-side initialization script, I am adding backbone validations to the backbone namespace, and as well as I'm doing that on the server. That code is actually shared as well. But so I have this article model, I have the validations. This is being shared both between the client and server. And the reason why these are split up is because you can't have the same sync method. You can't have a sync on the server which hits your database when the client needs to make an AJAX request. So you got to split up that code. Like, there's no project that can be totally isomorphic. And if you're going to do is client or is server, like that just sounds messy. I would prefer to split it up. This is all really new, and I'm working on this as a little side project. I plan on open sourcing it when there's more documentation on it. My name's Michael Bennon, and it's my talk on isomorphic JavaScript. Thank you. Do you have any questions? All right, no questions. Okay, thank you.
There was a question.
You said you mentioned that you had like something like 256 JavaScript files, right? And Browserify, you mentioned also doesn't have like the AJAXing part of require.js. Do you actually compile all those files into one, or do you how do you like what's the context for like do you have separate Browserify builds for different sections? How does that work?
Yeah, right now it's one, and debug is 10 megabytes, and production is 346 KB. So yeah, and we have it with external source maps, so it's easy to find errors. Works really good.
A lot of that is source maps. A huge percentage of that is source maps.
It's interesting because like people say, oh my god, you're building everything with one file, but really that's what require.js does just on the client side in your browser right there. So it dumps it all into one file, one HTML file. So I think it's kind of, it's not as different as you might think.
Yeah, when you say you're using the same models on the back end as the front end node, is it sort of like when you're using Rails and you define your models and the ORM like integrates with the database, is that what you're saying, or is it like how does that work? Is it?
So with Backbone ORM, I suggest you look at that project. You can use either Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, SQLite, and there's tools that actually handle that for you that are Rails-like. There's also some other projects out there that do what you're talking about, that you want functionality from Rails from. I just wanted to say, last thing I just wanted to say, this Browserify does work in IE7 Plus, and if you want, you can npm install jQuery at one version and have 2 builds for that. So if you, and I know that a lot of people here need to support older browsers. I've succeeded in doing that as well. So yeah, that's it. That's my talk. Thank you.
Oh, March.
Sorry, it's something What?
No, I don't care.
No, I didn't.
We're going to completely buck with tradition and go with the long talk in the light.
Yeah, I can go.
Although I told Rushane that she'd be here for you. Come on. Yeah, come on.
Oh, no,
No, it's
she-
fine. She's on her
well,
way.
That's too bad for her.
It is. Oh, you already have.
You're
I do
recording.
have
She can watch the video.
I am recording, that is true. Although it's me doing the recording, which means it's definitely not as good quality as anyone else. Okay. But the funny thing is, for you, I have a whole big speech about this one, because this is
Oh, so this is why it's going to take a long time.
Yeah.
You're going to be talking.
because this is
Not even gonna let me
actually
get a word in.
this is
I
the
can
funniest
go now
talk
if you
proposal
want.
I have ever received in my life.
I can go if you want, just move it.
Oh. Okay.
Sure.
Just kidding.
We're informal.
We're bucking with tradition all the way. By the way, so you all know, at least some people who have been here before, we are not going to the usual bar. We're going to the bar that is slightly farther away, which means that hopefully it is not,
There's a bigger sign.
the drop-off is not going to be too high. But we should be able to fit everyone plus maybe 2 or 3 times more than that. So if you've come before to the drinking thing, which you do not have to drink at, you could just stand there and talk about HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. But feel now we will not be all cramped in a very, very tiny hallway.
What's the
But
bar?
Heartland Brewery. Heartland Brewery?
We can get in at least.
No, there's a Heartland right here.
Oh.
There are many Heartlands. Although I only knew about the one in Empire State Building for a long time. Please, feel free. You're all on camera, by the way. Everyone knows. So, wait, where was I? So you were coming to the bar, right? Heartland Brewery is really, really not that far away. So I will talk to you much more then, and I'm not going to give a speech before Brittany, because right now we're going to do it. Mark Ludlow, talk about...
I don't know, I'm all lost. Especially plugging in.
Well, he'll be talking about phone gap, another cool thing.
I had one.
Maybe you should ask him when he built himself in HTML5.
Oh, I don't think he did. Francis, the question has been posed if you hurt yourself using HTML5.
Yes.
Yes. we're that dedicated to our craft. There we go. Okay.
Candies.com if we're trying anything
So,
experimental.
the magical mobile app. Mark Ludlow. Thank you.
I'm going to swap waters.
It's all on TV, but I will have the same editing ability as I do my videography skills.
Gotcha. All right. Can everybody hear me? Do I need this? Do you use this? Yeah. Mike?
He did. Maybe for the, I think he mentioned the camera. It would be good for the camera to have a mic. Although I'm sure everyone in the room can.
It is now
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, so I'll be talking about the Magic mobile app and how easy it is to build a mobile app using HTML5. We're going to talk about PhoneGap. What is PhoneGap? So PhoneGap is basically a way to wrap your HTML5 app using native code on whatever device you really want it to run on. You can install it in the App Store and sell it just like any other native app. Again, the upside is that we're building an HTML5, which we all know and love. Again, it supports lots of platforms. One nice thing about PhoneGap is there's a whole plugin architecture. You can go find people who've written native things that you might need, or you can write your own native stuff. Good example is like you want to be able to hook into Google Analytics. You can, there's native Google Analytics libraries. You can call those from PhoneGap through a plugin rather than using the web-based one. Some people say PhoneGap, some people say Cordova. I guess in 2011, Adobe acquired Adobe acquired PhoneGap. At the same time, they didn't really want to have it, I guess, be a proprietary product, so they open source. They open source. They call it. They give it to Apache to manage. It's called Cordova, the Apache side, and PhoneGap is officially a Cordova distribution. They're essentially the same thing. Cordova is essentially the same thing as PhoneGap. The big thing that Adobe does is they've added some services and a few things that live on top of the kind of core Cordova. So big one is PhoneGap Build, so you could actually build your PhoneGap app without having access to a Mac. So you basically just send your code up to the cloud, they build it, and then you can test it and deploy it, I guess, within their framework without having to have a Mac. Because we all have Macs these days. So who's using PhoneGap? This is from the official PhoneGap site. These are all apps. I'd honestly, other than BBC, I'd really never heard of any of these guys. There is an untapped thing down the bottom that looks interesting about beer. But more importantly, I work for the street, and we use PhoneGap. What happened on this slide? Huh. I guess that slide got lost. So we use PhoneGap for the street.com. It's a financial news site. We've actually built a couple different mobile apps using PhoneGap. I had some screenshots here. I guess that slide disappeared. I demoed it to John a little while ago. I'm pretty impressed with it. It was just he made me come and stand up here and talk to you guys. If you guys want to see it, you can, I guess, go download it from the App Store. It's on the Amazon and the Amazon, Apple, and Android, or Google Play. So some of the pros and cons of using PhoneGap. So obviously pros are you can build it out very quickly using HTML5. We all know HTML5 pretty well here, I hope. You can target many devices. That's really one of the reasons we wanted to do it. I didn't really want to write, one app for Apple, one app to run Apple, one app to run on Android, and potentially other devices if we decided to, if a Microsoft platform is something that gets some traction. I didn't want to write for that. So it's nice you can get kind of one core skill set, build out most of your app. Again, honestly these days it's a lot easier to find a JavaScript programmer than it is to find an iOS programmer, or even more likely a guy who knows how to build Java, Android apps in Java. So that was another benefit. And then the nice thing about PhoneGap, another nice thing about PhoneGap is there's a pretty good community. They're constantly updating, they're constantly supporting it. There's a lot of plugins. So again, when I wanted to talk to, I think what some things I had got plugins for. I know I built a plugin for to connect to kind of do social sharing. And I built tweak some stuff to do again to talk to Google Analytics. I guess the Google Analytics was one that we were able to get most of the code off of the web. Some of the cons, things, as good as the built-in stuff to get the running HTML5 apps on a web control within a native app are, it's never going to be as fast as a native app. You're not going to build mobile. You're not going to build games. You're not going to build anything that requires heavy-duty graphics performance, or probably any heavy-duty number crunching. Another con is we're sort of living between these two worlds, so of mobile, native mobile devices and HTML5. And one of the things I struggled with was trying to find there's some libraries or some things I wanted to use that just didn't work in either place. A good example there was Google DoubleClick stuff. They've got DoubleClick, which supposed to run on mobile websites and run on standard websites. Could not get it to work properly within PhoneGap. They've got AdMob, which is their solution for mobile devices. AdMob needs to live though outside of the control. So if you're kind of adding an ad to a mobile app with AdMob, you're very limited in where you can put that ad. You basically stick it at a banner at the bottom, and it has no idea of what's going on within your app. So you change views, the ad doesn't know that you change views. So if you want to just leave an ad running all the time at the bottom, it might work. So that was certainly one of my larger issues. And then there's a pretty big file size. There's an awful lot of stuff that needs to get compiled up into this, or bundled up into the application. So it's not, I think our app's probably about 35 megabytes, which seems pretty big for a basic newsreader type app. All right, so it's going to show you a little demo here. So I went and I basically built this little, this is just a standard HTML5 app. It's using jQuery mobile. What I'm doing here is I'm connecting to Flickr's API in the back end and kind of doing some searches for geotagged images on Flickr. So if we click through here, we can see some geotagged images. I'm using a plugin called Photo Swipe, which kind of gives you this, very quickly gives you a nice little position swipe. So it doesn't do a lot. These are all train stations, and they help. If you go to the MTA site, you can actually download it. They have an API site, which isn't really an API. They just give you a bunch of flat files, but they do give you all the geographic locations of all the train stations, or the GPS coordinates for all train stations. Current location, not going to work because I don't have the GPS on my laptop. So that's pretty basic app. Screen is tiny. Maybe I'll show you the source code. So again, so this is my little tiny one-page app. Basically, again, I've got to call the Flickr in here to go get some information based on location. I've got my, there's some HTML here to just set up my jQuery views. So basically, let's take this app. This is a PhoneGap project. So there's most of the stuff in PhoneGap is done from a command line. So basically, just go into Cordova, say Cordova, create a basic project, and it creates something I can then open up in this little Java project. So I've opened up the Android project in my Java editor with IntelliJ. Just sort of drop your HTML files into the www directory. You've got some. I think the key thing is you gotta have this Cordova file, and you've gotta have this Cordova plugins file living in this directory. Other than that, it's pretty much just a stock vanilla HTML5 app. And then the same thing, kind of run the same thing and solve it to build an Xcode app. And again, it just kind of gives me creates a massive project and copies in the few files that I need for to run this thing on Android or on an iOS device. And then if we build this and run it, fire up my little emulator here. So now here's my app. It kind of looks not much different, but it's wrapped up in an app. The big difference here now is I can actually tell it I can use my GPS and maybe if I'm lucky get images based on GPS coordinates. Maybe not. Yep, there we go. These I believe are from San Francisco because I think the built-in emulator thinks it's in San Francisco or somewhere. The other place I have this thing here is on my phone. It didn't work that well. Oh, sure. In principle, that was gonna work.
You can still tell.
You can still tell? All right, there we go.
We know it's real.
Uh-oh. I hit the right button. I just wanted to show you sort of current, you know, my phone, hopefully can get a better color location. We can actually get images. There we go. So now we have images which look like they're probably from this general area. So I was able to very quickly use the GPS, the ability from phone gap. Let's get rid of me. So again, very quickly, I'll be able to, I think it's like one line of code to do that. Let's show you the function here, but I just, it's very hard to record on the panel screen. Here we go. So there's a couple of code here that basically can get our current position through phone gap. So that's basically calling our phone gap plugin, and we can make calls using the data we get. So that's, I think that's my demo. It went not as good as I would hope, but hey, it worked. After until about 5 minutes ago. So, any questions there?
So how faithful is the DOM emulation? Does it have like a named browser, a known?
Well, it's WebKit.
It's WebKit. Okay.
It's actually nice because in my street app I'm using, we use the the SQLite database, SQLite database, which is not part of the W3 standard. They actually refused to accept it as a standard in the middle of development, which was kind of a little worried. Google basically said they'll keep it in WebKit, and all the other than Microsoft, I mean, all the major phone manufacturers use WebKit as their kind of built-in browser. So that's pretty useful.
What's the name of the global variable you can check for that's like kind of consistent with all devices, whether it's iOS or Android or? You know,
There's a plugin. I don't actually have it installed right now, but it's just like navigator.device or something like that, and it'll come back and tell you what device you're running on.
But like to let you know that you're inside of a phone gap though. So if you wanted to write something for web and then you wanted to reuse it for something inside a phone gap app, is there anything that you could check for where there'd be a difference? Like if there's like a window.is phone gap or something like that?
There's definitely things like that. I actually want to write. I actually wrote my own little plugin to get the assembly version. For some reason, that PhoneGap doesn't have that, so I wanted to have an about dialog, which would actually pull the assembly version from the version from the assembly. I wanted to display the about dialog within my app, so I wrote I wrote a little plugin, which is like very few lines of code, which goes and pulls the assembly version from the whether it's Android or the iOS assembly. So I just kind of check that because that fails if it's not if I'm not running on a device. But I'm sure there's got to be lots of ways to do that.
Did you in your did you go with a single UI across all platforms, or did you?
Yeah.
Or was it okay?
I mean, there might be a few subtle things because in the Android world you can't. I mean, one thing in the Android world we weren't able to do yet is create a tablet version. So basically, if you go run our Android app, it's gonna look, it's the phone version. Things kind of expanded. It looks a little weird on a tablet. The main reason there is, it's actually more just an issue with Android. They don't give you they don't have a nice way of telling you whether you're on a tablet or a phone. There's some, I guess I think with KitKat, they've kind of started to standardize on it.
But you didn't do buttons that look one way on iOS and one way on Android? And one way on
No, we didn't. We actually built the app that we're actually, the app we're framing with PhoneGap is actually a Sencha app. And Sencha actually supports themes across different devices, but we didn't go to that degree of customizing.
Did you have any, I guess, cross-platform issues? Like between the different devices that I guess are not obvious, like say flip device feature?
We have a decent amount of problems with our video player. But that might be just because the video player doesn't work. So we're using a Kaltura video player. So it definitely it would behave there was a lot of weird settings and tweaking of settings to get it to work consistently across all the different devices. But in general, it was, again, they're all using WebKit, so that's definitely a nice thing, is we didn't have to deal with any, from the HTML5 layer, any kind of tests across browser, across device tests.
Is the video element work?
Yeah, I can show. I mean, on my phone, I can show you. I can show you our app. Where you
I would actually
can
encourage you to
our app.
download this street because it is now my example of how a PhoneGap application can really be really good. I'm not kidding.
I just want to throw something out there. I mean, you're in WebKit. You have all of your media selectors. Go wild on a responsive design, and you can have, you could think about it as if you have taken the app cache and loaded it onto the phone. That's not what PhoneGap is doing, but you can think about it in kind of similar terms. If you have a nice responsive design sketched out, there you go.
I mean, the other thing, actually, one of the other cons I didn't list out here is the nice thing about doing things with the PhoneGap versus building a mobile site is this will work offline. So we did an awful lot of work on the Streets app to get things to work nicely offline. So none of our content comes directly from, comes directly into the app. It all comes through a caching layer, which is built around SQLite. So when I'm online, I'm pulling content in, and then if I'm offline, I'm sitting down on the train. I still have access to a couple hundred stories I can read if I need to. Video doesn't work offline, but in general, most of it does. So you got to. I mean, that's one other thing you do have to be careful about, making sure every library you use has to be able to run locally. And some libraries call out to other libraries. Some stuff calls out to other stuff. I mean, you don't realize until you start playing around with it offline and things fail. It's like when you start drilling into it, it's like, oh, these idiots actually are making some call out over the internet.
What's interesting is that there's work going on to solve that problem completely, not just from a PhoneGap perspective, but from a web apps on your phone perspective, making them work offline. It's a thing called Service Worker. It's pretty cool. The idea is that you get to install a JavaScript web worker that acts as a proxy. So whenever anything in JavaScript says, I want to go to the internet, or I need data from this URL, you can just respond with something that you've cached locally, or with a custom response or anything like that. So, I mean, yeah, you can't do mobile web apps that are as good as this, with offline capabilities as PhoneGap apps, but we're trying to fix that, and that's an interesting avenue.
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of offline, I've talked to some guys that work for Financial Times, and they don't have any apps in any of the stores, and they have an amazing HTML5 app that you'll get if you go to their site on your phone. And the reason they don't want to be in any stores is they don't want to give any of their subscription revenue to Apple. So that's the downside here. This is a free app. We don't have to worry about that. But yeah, if you're running a subscription site, you might want to double, think about being in the App Store completely.
You mentioned that you use Sencha. Would you recommend it, or some other framework?
Sencha is a real pain in the ass, and it takes 3 times as long, 4 times, 5 times as long to do anything as you think it would take you to do, and it's really hard to find anybody who knows anything about it. That said, every time we kind of decide, so we built 2 apps already in-house using this framework. We're in the process of building a 3rd app, and all 3 times we started out, we kind of said, all right, what's the best thing out there we can use as far as an HTML5 framework? And Sencha just keeps coming out because it does feel like, it feels more, what you're building feels more like a native app than anything else. They've got menus, they've got all these slides, they've got all these animation effects. You know, they've got a lot of good front-end GUI stuff that nothing else out there right now has. I mean, this is actually the first time I played around with jQuery Mobile, and every jQuery Mobile site looks exactly the same. Which you obviously don't want if you're trying to build a commercial app. You want to look different than somebody else. So.
Were there any performance reasons that you saw use Sencha? I know there's a big difference between you know, building those views or the rendering with HTML and then
Sencha again is actually probably performance. It probably actually hurts performance because again, Sencha is very heavyweight. So I think all the libraries you have to include with Sencha come out to like 300K or something like that. So this is the one place I probably would use Sencha. I don't think you use it on a mobile site because it's so heavy that your users, it's the first time they've been to your site, are going to sit there, you know, for a while downloading all the libraries.
I know Sencha came out with an app called Fastbook, which was basically to respond to like Zuckerberg.
Right. Yeah, we played around with that a lot.
It was actually really, it seemed performant, the concept.
What's interesting is they never wrap Fastbook up with PhoneGap. I don't think it would be anywhere near as fast as Facebook. Because the big problem with PhoneGap is at least on the iOS side and the Apple side, the web control you're using is not accelerated the same way that Safari is accelerated. So Safari, you get a little bit better graphics, or the graphics acceleration is used in Safari. It's not used in the WebKit, than the web UI view that you would put into an app like this. I mean, it's not bad, especially on newer devices. I think if we were at this point, if I ran it on I think when I run it on iPhone 4, which is probably about the lowest device we kind of support, it's pretty sluggish. But certainly on iPhone 5 or modern Android device, it works very well. Anybody else? Oh.
So the truth is that like anything that requires a lot of performance other than graphics could all be wrapped in a plugin. So
yeah.
I mean, we do a lot of photo editing, and even like some limited video editing, and we all do that through a plugin in the backend for the actual native app. But actually, the front end and everything else with the controls are web-based.
Okay.
So any heavy data comes in.
But I mean, then it sounds like almost. I mean, I guess if it would most of your work though, or most of the development effort, be around the
Most of it you do like through PhoneGap, but like for example, if you do something like heavy, like even data storage or photo editing, anything like that, you create one simple plugin that does that task and that handles that. So that improves performance a lot.
Yeah, certainly if I want to do photo editing in my app, I think we'd have to do something like that. But yeah, but then you've also got to make sure you have a similar plugin on Android and on all the other devices.
Flappy Bird plugin?
Oh. What's that?
I was saying a Flappy Bird plugin.
Oh, right. Flappy Bird probably work fine with PhoneGap. It doesn't actually record performance. Yep.
Are there any things like, I don't know, maybe down performance or just are there any things that you can normally do in a web app that don't translate well to PhoneGap or it doesn't handle well? You mentioned the performance there, but like get user media perhaps, or
again, I forget his name. What you said. I mean, you're in this WebKit. I mean, think about it. Like Chrome's probably the best performing browser out there. So you're starting off in a pretty good spot. I haven't found anything.
One issue is older versions of Android have really old versions of the web view, whereas like an Android, browser may have.
I'm only supporting Android
may
4
have
and up on
Chrome running in the browser. The web view is still the old version. Of
I agree. I mean, and then you do get into testing issues too. I mean, that was probably the bigger reason why I didn't want to go back and support like Android 1 and 2, and because now I've got to go find a bunch of ancient devices I can test this stuff on. So it's pretty easy to find people around my office with Galaxies and HTC Ones, but I think having trying to support some Motorola Razr from 5 years ago, probably or 3 years ago, would probably be tough Cool. All right.
So I'm going to successfully fight the urge to talk about conspiracy theories around Apple and why Safari is going faster than get PhoneGap. I've also decided to delay my story about the great Britney stories until the end of the talk because I think it will be a lot more impactful at that time.
But what if I spoil it? Like.
Oh, I didn't know that was going to be a possibility. No, if you spoil it, it's more appropriate if you don't. So now we're going to hear about taming the technical debt for Britney Soros.
Yes, I do that. I've happened before, but I don't know what it is. I'm not stupid. Okay, mic is good? Okay, everyone can hear well? Okay, so I'm Brittany Strohs. I work at the New York Times. I used to work at Condé with John Paul, and I know some of you guys work there now, and that's all I'll say about that. Presentation is on GitHub right there. That's my Twitter handle, and today I just want to talk about technical debt and what we can do to solve it if you're in a code base that already has a ton of it, or what we can do to prevent it. Working in a newsroom is a very bizarre environment to be programming in because we're on such tight deadlines all the time. So at the New York Times, we are really, really struggling with technical debt sometimes and what kind of processes we need to put in place in order to keep these code bases maintainable and in a good state. So what does a debt-riddled code base look like? What are we going to see when we're looking at these code bases and struggling through them? We're going to see a lot of styling inconsistencies, maybe indentation, white space, casing, where it looks like there wasn't really a style guide put in place for these kinds of things. This is going to be problematic when you're doing when you're pushing code to GitHub, and all of your diffs are going to have like no new line at the end of the file, or they're going to have a bunch of trimmed trailing white space at the end of your line. So it's going to make your diffs really hard to read. Outdated, vague documentation, which is outdated and vague documentation is worse than no documentation at all. People are going to spend a lot more time struggling through how to get used to a code base, how to work with a code base, if they're not following the right documentation. Little or no testing. Everyone's very adamant about making sure that we are testing our code, mostly so that we can prevent bugs. My big argument for testing is that it helps new developers get into the code base and understand what the intentions are of that code base. And lastly, an uninformative and noisy commit history. This just makes it hard for you to go back and look at your app in a different state. In the past, if you're looking back for a particular commit and you're looking through a lot of merged commits and or very like unuseful commit messages that don't really provide much context to the code that was being put in. So let's look at some code first. This is my example of really bad JavaScript, and I was trying to intentionally write bad JavaScript, and it's much harder than it seems. I was even asking people on Twitter if they happen to have some bad JavaScript they could send along to me so I could get some ideas. After struggling through that for a while, I just looked at one of my repositories, found some code I wrote probably last week, I don't know, and it's horrible. Very easily refactorable, lots of parse ints everywhere. I don't know what I was doing here. Difficult to follow. This is not good JavaScript. But in my opinion, this is not technically considered debt. This is only technical debt if there's no documentation around it, if there's no tests for it, or if it doesn't conform to style guides. Code like this, everybody has to write bad code at some point. Maybe there's not a better solution at the time. You're waiting on a better solution, or you just don't know that it's bad. Everyone writes bad code. You look back at it a week later and you're like, what was I thinking? Like, what was I doing, you know? So everyone is going to write bad code. It is not technical debt unless it's unstyled, it's undocumented, it's untested. It's a somewhat unpopular opinion that I hold, but I stick to it. So if this isn't technical debt, what is? Technical debt is a symptom of poor planning. Technical debt means there was no plan to prevent that kind of code, and there was no plan to fix that kind of code. There's nothing in place to maintain that kind of code. It's a process problem. It's not it's a workflow problem. It's not like a skills problem. It's not because you're inexperienced at writing JavaScript or whatever language you're writing in. It's not because we're lazy, even though we are. It's because we shouldn't have to think about those things, so we're not going to waste our time working through styles when we just want to write our code. And it's not a deadline problem either. Excuse me. Deadlines obviously are very difficult to write good code on, but if you have the right tools in place, this shouldn't be a problem, and I would still not consider that technical debt. So my last point is that it's a sign of not using the right tools. It's a sign of a team not putting the right things in place in order to prevent that kind of code. So most people normally say the first solution to fixing technical debt is just make a style guide. Obviously that's a big step. You should all agree on conventions and styling that you guys are going to use in your projects. But what's the problem with this is that you're going to put it somewhere either on GitHub or in some internal admin, and people aren't going to look at it, or people aren't going to be able to find it. Or even if they do find it and they do look at it, who wants to go back and reference these things every single time that they're trying to write a comment or every single time they're writing their CSS? So what makes following style guides easier for people? One thing that I do a lot is create custom snippets for my text editor. I use Sublime Text. I'm not sure what you guys use, but you can do these kinds of things with pretty much any text editor. I'm sure there's a way for these things to be in place. So let's think about like commenting. Like if you're commenting your JavaScript, I like to use JS style comments. So if I'm writing a function, foo bar das, and I need to comment this, I have a snippet in my Sublime Text where I can just go like this, and it automatically formats my comment for me exactly to spec for JS doc. And now I can just go in, thank you, write my description, format my parameters, and tell it what it's going to return. Now I never have to look back at what does a JS doc style comment look like. This particular snippet is on GitHub called DocBlocker, I believe. So that's a good one to install if you don't have it yet. So besides style guides and besides automating all of those things, like not having to format things on your own and not having to remember those kinds of things. You've heard this 1,000 times, write your tests. Everyone is very adamant about that in our industry, about making sure that you're testing all of your code. In a newsroom, we honestly don't have time to write tests. It's very rare that we have the time to write a test for our applications. But there's still things that you can do to put in place so that you get back to writing these tests. I'll show you a file that I actually pulled from one of our live applications earlier. So we have a ballot application up and running on the New York Times, and there's hundreds of ballots that use this application, and this is what the test file looks like right now. And it is live in production. We can all take a moment to boo and hiss at this if we'd like, but guess what? Like, nobody is dead. Nobody is dead. Writing tests is a luxury. That said, if you hate writing tests, I will say that again, writing tests is a luxury, so do not take for granted the time that you have to write tests. Like I said earlier, it's a great way for people to know how the code base is intended to work. If you don't have time to write tests, you're probably also not writing documentation as thoroughly as you should or as well as you should. If you write out these tests from the beginning, this is your documentation. This is your roadmap for the next developer coming in that says there's no README for this app. How am I supposed to know what this does? Go to the test file. See what these tests are saying that this app should do. And even if you don't have time to actually write the tests, stub them in. When I'm in a meeting and we're discussing like what a project is going to be, when we're fleshing something out, fleshing out a new idea or something, I'll sit there in the meeting and instead of like using a pen and paper and taking notes like it's the 1800s, I'll stub out my tests. So if we're doing this ballot app, describe user ballot. What should it do? Support up to 5 questions. People are throwing ideas out at me while I'm sitting here taking notes. I can write out all my tests as we're going through the meeting. And then as soon as I leave the meeting, I have an outline of exactly what it is I need to build. And the next person coming in, if I never get around to writing my README, they have a roadmap for what this app is doing. And lastly, my favorite thing and most important thing is Git. And I abuse Git to no end. It's my favorite thing to do, but it helps significantly with getting rid of debt. And a lot of people have a superficial understanding of Git. People understand like the basic commands that they teach you when you're going through intro tutorials or something. But if you really get into the nitty-gritty of Git, you're going to learn a lot and it's going to help your process out a lot. One unconventional thing that we do at the times with Git, we're working on an application. We had Super Bowl coverage last month. And I used to be very strict about my Git commit messages. So always like starting with an uppercase letter, no punctuation at the end, always in the same tense. And when we're doing the Super Bowl app, things start out pretty okay. My commit messages make sense. They they're all in the same style, as are my teammates, who is blanked out for privacy purposes. But then the game starts. So we're doing live coverage of the Super Bowl. The game starts, and people start getting frustrated, and people start getting sloppy. And you find bugs that you're like, what are these? Why is this happening? And then the commit history just goes downhill from there, okay? So this is what happens. And then the game is over. And that's our commit history. So now what? We're left with this kind of history in our master branch? I don't think so. So what we'll do in a scenario like this is create a new branch and deploy from that one instead. You do not always have to deploy from master. People are very strict about saying master should always be production ready, you should always be going to production with master. If you're in a scenario like that, weigh the cost of having that in your history versus telling your team that's working on the app at the time, this is the branch that we're deploying from. If there does happen to be a big bug fix that does need to make its way back into master, yes, master isn't production ready anymore, but also take the cost of having that in your commit history in master versus cherry picking the good commits from that event and putting them back into master. And this isn't just like a newsroom thing, it's not specific to a newsroom, it's a strategy you can use in a lot of different scenarios. If you're doing a different style for your website over the course of an event, like when I was in college, I managed a website where every finals week we would just redesign the whole thing and make it really ugly for a week, or we would do something really different with it for a week. But then we were never going to use that code again. We were going to throw it out, put it in a different branch, deploy from a different branch for that week, leave master alone, let master stay clean. And it's also nice to have the comic relief of those commits after the fact when you're very frustrated with something and everyone is on edge, it's nice to look back at those branches and look at those commits and be like, that was a good time. So lastly about Git, I want to talk about pre and post commit hooks really quickly. These are both super important for maintaining your code base. Pre-commit hooks will help you take care of some of those styling things that we talked about earlier. So it's gonna, if you're running JS Beautifier, if you're using build tools like Grunt, if you guys were here in February, Juan gave a really good talk on all the different build tools available to you guys. Use a build tool and just run JS Beautifier, run JS Hint. All of your code is going to be standardized. All of your code is going to be clean. You'll never have to think about those things. One problem that I ran into when putting in some hooks with repositories that my team works on is that some people felt that you should leave these things up to the developer. They should be the developer's choice. So a lot of people on my team had their text editor settings to take care of beautifying or trimming white space or something. But what happens then is that everyone has different settings, and you're still committing very different code, and you're still getting very unreadable diffs. So using a pre-commit hook ensures that everyone is committing with the same exact style. You're never going to get unreadable diffs if it's in a pre-commit hook. Another concern that people had was that if you're on deadline or you need to push something out, you can't have a pre-commit hook blocking you. You need to be able to get that code out. You have to get it out. If a test is failing on your pre-commit and you can't commit your code to production, like what are you going to do? Commit hooks are so easy to add, update, and remove. Removing a commit hook is as simple as deleting the file. Getting past like a test running is as simple as commenting out the test if you really have to do it. Like, there's a lot of ways around that, so just not a valid argument to be concerned about a pre-commit hook blocking your production cycle. So pre-commit hooks feel like are a lot more popular around with people in the dev industry, but post-commit hooks are also super useful as well. And what I like to use them for is creating GitHub issues. So when I commit ugly code, like that first slide that we saw, say I know that it's ugly and I know it needs to be refactored, but I either don't have time or there's just not a better solution at the time. You always want to have some kind of Trello card or a GitHub issue or something to coincide with that code so that it's still on your radar, even though it's in the code base, it's still sticking around so that you know you have to take care of it later. There is a very cool GitHub repo that lets you run, create GitHub issues on the command line. And you can do a lot of cool things with this. If you haven't used it, I would definitely give it a try. You can install it a couple different ways, and then there's a whole bunch of options that you have available to you. You can label them, you can assign them to someone, mark milestones, anything that you want to do with these. So this is a great thing to install either as a post-commit hook, or I have mine aliased. So if I'm going to let's commit something, change this. Okay, so say I know that I just messed up my title and it needs to be refactored. My title that I just edited needs to be refactored, and I want to open an issue up for it so that I don't forget it. The way I have mine hooked up is that I have an alias called GC issue, which stands for git commit issue. And what it's going to do is it'll open up my bin so I can enter my commit message. Changed presentation title. This is a bad change to do refactor. So what this just did was committed my change and then opened up an issue right here. Opening up GitHub issue, status is opened. My label is called refactor. That's what I have mine set to right now. And then you get your description of the title of your issue and another status update that says that it's open. And then if we go to my repository, that should have just appeared right there. So now automatically you have an issue opened up for, yeah. So whenever you need to open up an issue with something right away, you're not going to forget about opening this up later. It's going to be right there for you. And this is really quickly, I have just what, let's see, I have that alias somewhere. This is just what my alias looks like. Grab the head of the most recent commit in Git and grab the message from that. A lot of people don't like to do this. I don't mind doing it, but I'm looking for whenever I put a to-do in the extended description of my commit message, if there's something in there, my next line is always going to be my title. So that's just how I format my commit messages to begin with. There's a lot of other ways you can do this where you don't have to style your commit message in a particular way, but this does not bother me because I was going to do that anyway. So this is just a very easy way for me to pull out what it is that I want to do, what the issue is that I need to fix. And as a post commit hook, that might look something like this, if you wanted to install it that way. Any questions? That's it, I'm done. Yeah.
I have a question about the GitHub, going back to the branches or the names or whatever, and cherry picking. It seems like I haven't really done it much myself, partly because it seems like if I've made that big mess, it's a lot of work to go through and figure out which pieces were the correct ones. So if you don't have time to test and you don't have time to write good messages, then how do you have the time to do that? Or how does that all work?
Again, that's a weigh the cost of doing this now versus doing it later. If I leave that entire history in my master, I'm not going to have time to look through all of master later. That one branch, I'm going to know exactly where it started, I'm going to know exactly where it ended, and I'm going to remember where those big bugs were. I'm going to remember where those big fixes are. You could also do exactly as I just described with a git commit issue. If you have a fix that you're putting into one of these branches that you're working on in production, just really quickly open up an issue for it. You don't even have to describe the issue or anything. If you're in a hurry, just git commit issue, open up an issue. It's going to show you the commit that it came from. You'll know exactly what commit to look back at to see the diff and to see what changed and what needs to get back into master.
Okay.
Yep.
How do you manage having a few pre-commit hooks?
Build tools.
Okay.
So I use Grunt for a lot of stuff. I was actually going to show a pre-commit hook and a Grunt config file, but I realized it was all JPs, and I was hesitant. It was all stolen, but I use it all the time. So I will use Grunt to do JS beautifier, JS hint, and run tests. I use Mocha usually, so I'll run tests.
I guess what I meant more was, how do you manage having this specific pre-commit or more across your team?
Well, I haven't run into that problem yet because I'm the only one that's putting in pre-commit hooks. So they're all mine.
There are lots of different ways to do that. The way I have solved that is have a script that automatically runs every time you run anything, that automatically installs it for you without paying any attention to the fact that it's happening.
So you just have it in your project, and whenever it runs, it symlinks it.
So there is whatever build tool you're using, we have to use.
So there's a couple NPM packages.
Yes, there are. So that's what I think he's going to talk about.
When you install them, will like copy directories or symlink directories into the right place. So if you just put a dependency like git post install hooks, next time somebody goes to do npm install in my project, it'll be good to go.
I find that kind of
creepy. I don't like how you can just do whatever you want.
Most install hook. Read the source, man.
I know. Read the source of error.
Yeah.
So regarding technical debt, I kind of had a different like mindset coming in, thinking of what you were going to talk about. And this is all good stuff like testing, all that. What about dealing with, you know, I also work in a newsroom environment, so.
Oh, interesting.
So as you may know, things happen, like ads are breaking something on the site, so this needs to work.
In that Super Bowl app, there's a
Yeah.
commit for me that says remove all ads because they just broke everything.
So
I didn't
yeah.
include that one.
So I guess my question would be like, how do you deal with, okay, we did this stuff in a pinch, and now we need to go back and actually fix it so we can actually make changes to this.
So,
I think it's a bigger.
for those of you who don't work in a newsroom, probably almost everybody else, does anybody else work in a newsroom? Yeah? Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. Good to know. So the life cycle of your workload in a newsroom is you're going to be on deadline, maybe pulling all-nighters for weeks straight, and then some weeks are just going to be super slow. There's just not going to be any news. So during those slow weeks is when we start prioritizing getting back to the cleanup of those things. And it is up to us to like label ourselves the owner of a particular application and put ourselves in charge of refactoring something or cleaning something up that got messy during an event or whenever we were doing a big push with it. But I get a sick amount of satisfaction out of refactoring things. So I like doing this internal cleanup and stuff. But as long as there's something in place where people know I'm the owner of this application, when I have a slow week, this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm doing, this is where it's getting refactored.
I mean, I think your other point about not deploying the master helps too.
Yeah, for sure.
Deploy the crappy version and then set, pick and choose, or just fix whatever you fix it correctly before you went back to master.
Right.
As far as your a lot of your earlier issues were around different white space. Do you not use a white space, a diff tool to make more white space?
Well, when you're in GitHub, or when you're committing something, your diff is often going to say like it's going to catch all of those things.
Oh, so it's just maybe we need to get GitHub to fix it.
Or just code your code correctly.
Use a pre-commit.
You're not going to change somebody's style.
Well,
No, I know that.
Your diff even your diff doesn't include white space. Doesn't mean that all of you like 4 spaces, but I like 9 tabs.
Oh, we know it.
Isn't going to be a
Right.
Those are
I mean,
conversations
I
we had
never
before.
there are plenty of people who, yeah, they go in and they start respacing out.
So
the
that's
code
what the
and
purpose
white
of the
space.
whole, I have this area to talk about.
So the purpose of a beautifier is that you can keep your own styles and you can code the way that you want to code without having to conform to anything. You're not conforming to a style. You're doing whatever it is you want to do. And the pre-commit hook or running JS beautifier after the fact is what's going to get it back in line with what your team decided was better. If your team decided 2 spaces instead of 4, but you like 4, write with 4. Just make sure that before that gets pushed to the repository, something is running through and changing it back to 2.
Have you found a way to do like git add the file that and then it runs the beautifier? Because I noticed like the JS beautifier, it's beautifier verify, and then I find myself having to try to commit and it fails. And then running the beautifier, and then I can add the file and commit it. So I don't know if you found a way to solve that in a way where if you add a file, it automatically beautifies it.
So by adding a file,
Pre-add.
Yeah, there's
Oh.
a pre-add. I want a pre-add, but I can't do it.
You can use a watch.
I guess.
yeah.
With a nice long debounce time, so it's not
Get the JS line in your editor, and that
So
way
that-
you're gonna
okay,
naturally
so this is bringing
go
up a
for it.
lot of interesting
Yeah.
problems about frequent hooks, and I probably should cut off, but I will talk
Yeah.
anyway. So it is actually very complicated to get a lot of developers to agree on, well, not only agree on something, but to agree on if something should be changing behind the scenes. Because if you have some tool like a watcher that automatically will make your 4 spaces into 2 behind the scenes,
depending on your editor, you might have to manually refresh from the file system. There might be problems around making sure that your IntelliJ or your Eclipse or whatever is configured to automatically immediately show you all of the changes. Because of that, it's really difficult to make one rule. It's pretty easy to say across the board, we are mandating everyone uses 2 spaces and that's just going to be the way it is. But it's much more complicated to say, I'm going to have this tool running in the background that will always change your code in your editor while you're not paying attention to enforce two spaces across the board. That's why pre-commit hooks and stuff like that are where it is more appropriate to say, now that you're done with one logical thing, now when I've finished with a commit, I've added my blue button, I've removed all ads because the New York Times doesn't make money. And I sorry, I don't know that cute. So then
you're working kind of yes.
Paywall.
Yeah, yeah, that was the joke. So we can do this. So that only when that, in my opinion, only when that complete thought is there is it more appropriate to say, now I'm going to format everything. Now I'm going to make sure everything matches the linting rules and all this.
Anything else?
We got one more quick question, and I'm going to cut it off in 2 minutes.
Okay.
You're around a beer.
I got a question.
Yeah.
The ops person in me is freaking out you're not deploying from master. So like how do you, so you've got this divergent branch now, you're deploying from there because we're doing horrible stuff and we don't want that to be in master. I get that. You sold me there. But so now it's later. Who remembers like what we last deployed from and like you know, how come you haven't immediately rebased it all and gotten that back into master and so now we're in a good state? Like how does that work?
So the people that are, for us specifically, for something like Super Bowl, we'll have maybe 4 people working on the app at a time during the actual event. Prior to that, it's usually just 1 or 2 people. Things are nice and easy and clean. And then during the actual event, we'll have a couple people collaborating on it. It's generally a thing where right after the fact, like, someone knows, like, I'm the one that's in charge of getting this stuff back into master. If you were the lead person on that project for the past 3 months and you only brought those other 3 people in during the actual event, you're the one that's in charge of bringing things back to master. When you have GitHub issues opened up, anytime that something needs to get back into master and everyone on our team agrees that this is what we'll do, you just go through the issues, look at the commit. If you have questions on it, you turn around and you ask your teammate, this fixed X, Y, and Z. This needs to go back into master, correct? Yes, and then you throw it back in. It's not like, after you go through hell like you do during the Super Bowl.
You got drink and then everybody forgets and now it's next year and you know.
But how short is your attention? How short is your memory?
Depends how much you drink. I get it.
Use Jenkins, and you know what? They'll let you push the production. Okay?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there's
I'm going to continue this discussion at the bar because I have lots of thoughts. Some more. Okay, thank you for bearing with us. Did you bring the laser pointer?
No, this clicker is a laser pointer.
I did not know that. People have asked me before, and I've said, bring your own laser pointer. I don't think Okay, so, thank you for bearing with us. I hope you're all going to the bar. I have like 2 minutes of things to do. One is Brittany's going to be starting a newsroom JavaScript meetup. It will be announced soon.
That is a lie. I don't have time for that. In journalistic fashion, I'm on deadline tonight, so I'll be at the bar.
I'll tell the story that I was going to tell earlier at the bar, so please come and talk to me about it. Okay, one thing, next meetup. April 16th, are you free? Yes. Are you going to sign up tonight? Yes. Okay, because this will go out, we'll get, RSVPs will fill up, and subsequently I will not be able to let you in. So, right now the meetup is open, all the topics are there. I didn't fill in everything, but chances are you really want to come anyway, so go RSVP April 16th, it's another Wednesday night. So I will hopefully see all of you that are in this room there again in April. The next thing, so there is, in case anyone is interested, so we got very nice emails from some people are running an AngularJS course here in New York. We can give you a discount. If you are interested, let me know. It's not particularly an advertisement because I'm not giving you any information. But if you're looking to learn about Angular, I can give you a discount on these things. I know last time I talked about podcasts and I've been talking about videos and I've been really lazy. I've been trying to find people who want to help me, one, handle the videoing thing because I'm not particularly good at it and I'm very slow at actually getting the videos up, as well as help with trying to organize and get us all together to get us, meaning the speakers, for every month together on a podcast or a Google Hangout, talking about more, just talking about things together about the topics that they talk about. I would love to get this thing online every month. I don't have time for it. If someone wants to help me and actually wants to commit to it, I would love to talk to you. Let me know. You know how to email me. It's actually not that big of a time commitment over the course of a month, but we can
like half of it's like logistics kind of plan.
Half of it is logistics, figuring out how to get everyone on at some weekend day together for 45 minutes. But and then half of it is clicking record in Google Hangout. It's just sort of things that me and co-organizers have a hard time pulling off as well as all of these things. So that is handling video things and handling podcasty things or Google Hangout things. Please get in touch with me. I would love to work with any of you and all of you, really. So you're going to the bar, right?
Where is
it? The
it?
bar? The bar is right across the street. It's really not far. It was just for you.
40 seconds.
Yes. So Heartland Brewery, that's not that far. I will see you there. And the last thing is, so Condé Nast gives us all this space, gives us all this food. I want to thank them. They are hiring. I was there. I'm no longer hiring for them, but it's an amazing team and an amazing place to work. So definitely let me know. Thank you so much for coming. I will see you on April 16th. I will see you later tonight. Have a good night.
Hey,
Oh, right. Gotta go.
To the
Yeah.
I have a long commute.
Yeah, no, I need
Yeah. No, I'm out.
Actually, I guess I have more of those. Give me more info because I don't want to like say I'm doing it. I realize I can't.
Sure. It is fairly 10 seconds. Hold that camera and then sync your computer and copy it over and upload it to my video account. That would be great. When you come in. Oh, really? That would be very helpful. That's great. Yes, we'll talk. Thank you. Yeah, it's not. My gut is an hour or two a month. Thank you. Well, I'll see you there.
You know, I'll go there.
Yeah, we'll work on it.
You know, the one thing.
2025?
I've been getting them back in this.
I'm gonna make it to the bar.
I'm all down.
I mean, as far as I know, she's been trying, but she's not getting it together.
I cried. I did. That was a funny way to
So
put it.
my thought was I made her quit because I told her that I was and I pushed her into the syntax.
Yeah, Mike will definitely see you there.
I tried writing my first unit. Word app. That way.
It was just us on the app. Yeah, I made it happen. And I for a while thought because oh my god. I realize now that's not true. I had everyone was like,
Well, you know what? I just think like well, working in a newsroom, you have to be able to tolerate at least a little bit of chaos. At least not everything has to be a process. Not everything has to be like so super black and white. Like